time, there wasn't support. There isn't enough support. I still don't believe there's enough support in the workplace. So if you don't have support systems around you, where do you turn to? How do you go find the answers? How do you go find the people that can make you feel like you're not going crazy?
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLaughlin.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms. So hello, and welcome to another episode of Midlife Unfiltered. Anita, how are you?
I am really well, Erica. Thank you for asking. I'm feeling good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to chatting with our guest today. We have another guest in to talk with us. And I think that this is going to be, I know this is going to be a really great conversation. We're going to be talking about midlife careers, but also through the context of the midlife transition and menopause transition. So I'm going to introduce our guest. Shall I go ahead and do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So we are joined today by the wonderful Wendy Alexander. And Wendy has written a book, which I'm going to try and get on camera here, called Internal Uprising. And it says, Reclaiming Your Voice and Wisdom Through Midlife, Menopause and Beyond. And I've known Wendy for quite a number of years, actually. And I was so excited when she brought out this book because she is a magnificent writer, an incredible voice in general, and I know she's going to add so much to this space. But we've brought Wendy in today to talk a little bit about her menopausal journey, her midlife journey, and then to specifically talk about midlife careers, because this is something that we know is a thing. We know that lots of women actually leave the workforce because of menopausal symptoms. And so we're going to talk to Wendy a little bit about some of that stuff through the lens of what her experience was like, but then she also supports people in the workforce and with career. I'm going to let Wendy explain this better, but, career transitions and things like that. So she's got some really great insight. So welcome, Wendy.
Thank you very much for having me. Lovely to be here.
So welcome. So do you want to do a little bit of a more comprehensive job of telling us what it is that you what it is that you do and who you are, and then just dive into talking a little bit about your midlife menopausal journey, because I know it was quite the ride.
Yes, it was. So I suppose the introduction about me is around growing up in a challenging environment in South Africa, migrating to Australia, going through a very difficult breakup and raising a daughter by myself. So that's, the nuts and bolts, the quick summary. And then where the career coaching comes in is trying to build a new life for myself and my daughter. I went down the path of, at that time, it was all about earning more money. There was no other motivation other than I need to raise this kid by myself, have all this debt, I need to earn more money. And what I did was I started talking to recruiters and hiring people and picking their brains for strategies, I suppose you could say. And then I have the writing ability. I was writing since I was a kid, wrote through all the trauma of South Africa. I've always written. So it's the way that I process. I process with words, I write journals, I write stories, I write poetry. You probably don't want to read my poetry from the time in South Africa because it was very angry poetry, I would say. But that was the environment I was growing up in. And so the combination of my writing skills and picking the brains of recruiters and hiring people led to the framework that I created for myself, and then catapulted my career by implementing my strategies. Now, they didn't work right off the bat, but it took refinement. I had to rewrite the resume a gazillion times, refine my strategies. But then probably 6 months, maybe 7 months after I started that process, I landed a role that doubled, probably tripled my income. And I was like, okay, I've got a strategy here. Something's working. Anyway, I went on to these roles in corporate. But the people around me who knew what I'd gone through, knew the rock bottom, the mess of my life, and then saw how quickly I catapulted in my career, they started coming for help. And so it was friends and it was family and it was colleagues initially. But they started getting the success as well. And so that was where the business was born. Now, the business was very much a part-time business because I was full-time in corporate. But along came menopause, much earlier, much earlier for me than I wanted or anticipated. So I think we put these stories in our head, or I see in life people sort of say this should happen at that time and that should happen at that time. And I definitely was one of those that in my brain, menopause was coming in my 50s, early to mid 50s. It came at age 45. And so I was unprepared. I was also at the height of my corporate success. I was in a high-powered job, earning loads of money, but along with that comes incredible stress and pressure. You have to perform. I'm managing budgets of $100, $200 million, projects, delivering these things, managing the teams, the people. So I'm expected to perform, but suddenly I'm not sleeping very well. I'm suffering from insomnia. The hot flashes are hitting me on a daily basis. And with my hot flashes came severe nausea. So I often had to dash off to the restroom. And then also the brain fog was intense. So suddenly, the things that I was able to rely on throughout my career, which was my hard working ethic, my organizational skills, focus skills, they were all letting me down because the physical and the mental and the emotional changes that my body was going through as the estrogen levels were dropping was something that was so unfamiliar to me. I didn't know what to do with it. And then at the time in that, that the conversation around menopause has improved in the last few years. I still think that there's a lot to be done. But certainly when I started, which is now over 12 years ago, so I'm 57 years old now. So I was 45 when it started. There was no support. There was no opportunity to have the conversation. I was also working in leadership roles, primarily led by men. Mm-hmm. So there is also a level of reticence and embarrassment around it, especially when I felt really ill, when the hot flashes would hit, my blouse would be wet from the sweat and all of that. I didn't know what to do about it. So I would just run out of the meetings, excuse myself and dash out of the meetings, go to the restroom, feel incredibly ill, splash water on the face, all of these things, calm down, and then go back into the meetings. So there wasn't an opportunity to talk about it. And I think I was too afraid and probably too embarrassed to talk to men about it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so there was a lot of suffering going on in that time. And in the workplace, it was suffering in silence. In the home place is where I exploded. I write about it in the book, my partner and my daughter making this ferrometer to measure my moods. And it was, when they made it, I was very upset when they made it. That was my first reaction to it because I was like, oh my God, this is how they see me. Eventually it became something humorous in the family and we used to laugh about it. But when they first made this ferrometer, I was like, wow, is this how they see me? This hellcat, this crazy woman, going off the deep end. And I think I had so many explosions in the home because I wasn't able to express in the workplace.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's what I think happened. And so
for sure.
All the pent-up frustration, all the pent-up fears, anxiety, you name it, and then still having to perform and deliver at that level, it just kind of overpowered me in the end. So when I'd be at home, oh yeah, my poor daughter and my partner really copped the brunt of my mood swings, which were going faster than a pendulum. I mean, it was crazy. So it was a very isolating time. And suddenly I noticed that I started to lose confidence, not just in the workplace, but in every area of my life. The well put together woman was no longer well put together. So it was a very difficult time.
Yeah. I see Anita doing a lot of nodding. I know you're
Yeah.
all the same age.
And
too,
well
aren't you?
put together on the outside at times, but on the inside, just, a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what it felt. I felt like I was a mess. And I had no idea where to start to get help. So I did spend, I would say, and I think a lot of women do this as well, certainly the women I've spoken to and work with now, we in denial. And for me, the denial was probably 12 months, before I actually started to go, hang on a minute, these symptoms are so consistent now. What if it is menopause? Is it perimenopause? What is it? Why am I going through this? Why am I not sleeping? Why am I having these hot flashes? Why is my brain so foggy? And why am I crying at the drop of a hat, falling apart at the seams all the time? So, but, the denial lasted for I'd say 12, 18 months. And then I actually actively started to go and look for help.
It's one thing I noticed in your book actually was around so part of what Wendy has done in her book is put in little bits, I can't think of what that's called, extracts, that's the thing I'm looking for, extracts from her journals at the time. And so we get like a bit of an insight into the way that she was thinking and feeling at the time. And one of the things that you wrote, Wendy, and I can't remember exactly where it is to read off the page, but there was very much this sense of like, hang on, I'm the kind of person who solves problems. I don't bury my head in the sand and pretend that things aren't happening. I've been, through all these other things that I have managed to kind of surprise everybody by my resilience and my capacity to take charge and to change things. And then you were faced with this and you were like, well, why am I just sort of sitting here on my on my heels and not taking action? But I think it really speaks to, and I haven't been through the menopause transition, but it really speaks to how discombobulating that it obviously is, to not even feel like taking the normal steps that you would have in the past. So yeah, I don't think there's a question in that unless you heard one.
Well, I think when I think about that, I realize, because like I was saying, this well put together, I always knew I could rely on certain skills that were innate.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm unable to do what I was always able to do. But what I recognized later, and it wasn't at the time, it was later as I was journaling and writing my way through that mess, was that my brain function had was letting me down. So all the things that I would have gone to automatically, the focus, the problem solving, all of that didn't even enter my mind because the brain fog was so intense. And so I think women probably need to give themselves a moment, a break, to understand that you're not functioning in the way you always have functioned. And some of the skills that you've used in the past and the resilience skills, they're not always going to work initially. You actually have to go and figure out, like I had to go and okay, why is my brain so foggy? What's actually going on? And it's only when I went and sought help from the GP that I found, and it took a couple of goes before I found the right GP that helped me. Because here's the other thing I noticed when I did go to the very first GP, he said, oh, you can go on HRT. He never spoke to me about the emotional challenges of menopause, the mental challenges of menopause. It was all about the physical symptoms. And he shooed me out of his office very quickly. So there was no opportunity to ask him about all the anxiety I was feeling, all the confusion I was feeling, the fact that I wasn't sleeping, all of these type of things, And so I think women need to realize is that it is something completely different to all the other challenges, because this is a case of the physical symptoms, so your body's letting you down. And then there's the brain symptoms. So the brain's also letting you down, or you certainly feel like it. And then the emotional challenges that you're going through as well, because at the time there wasn't support. There isn't enough support. I still don't believe there's enough support in the workplace. So if you don't have support systems around you, where do you turn to? How do you go find the answers? How do you go find the people that can make you feel like you're not going crazy? Because that's how I felt, like I was going crazy. And it's very difficult to admit that, especially us women who are well put together on the outside. The last thing we want to do, and especially in corporate, you do not want to admit that you're not coping, that you feel crazy, because we always worry about being judged. And weak.
And you're weak and weak. You don't want to, you're the strong one, right? You're always in control. There's so much coming up for me. You're in control all the time. So as you say, the things that you normally rely on to get back into control don't work. You have to find what they are. Knowledge gaps are huge. So personal knowledge gaps, I still think that's massive. Most women don't even know how their cycle works. So the fact that you were actually aware that menopause was coming, I think, looking back 12 years ago, wasn't on my radar, and I'm 57 as well. So I completely relate to the age thing. So the fact that you saw that potentially coming, I commend you, because I still think a lot of women don't even have it on their radar, particularly, as you say, in their early 40s. And then there's the gaps in care, which we discover that we are big proponents of women being their own health advocates, because our wonderful GPs who have to do so much aren't trained in this area of health unless they choose to be. There's just gaps everywhere. And now you've got the workplace gaps as well. So, and then you've got your own career gaps, because, women are leaving if they don't have that support. So now you've got gaps in your income and gaps in your super, and God, it's a multi-gap universe.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Wow. So how did you start, Wendy? So how did you begin to put it together for you?
So look, the journaling certainly helped. And as I said, I processed through writing. So what I was noticing when I would reread the journals, I would see that there were patterns. There were certain feelings coming up all the time. I also noticed that I was writing about low self-esteem, and then I was writing about the physical symptoms, the insomnia, all of these things. So it was sort of over a period of time, I started noticing there's threads and there's patterns. And then I was like, well, how do I? Eventually, my problem-solving brain did kick in. And I was like, okay, I need to go and find a solution, because I suppose one of the mottos of my life, when I look at all the things I've been through, South Africa, coming here, the challenges, I've never wanted to be a victim of life or anything. It's always been very, very strong in the personality. I suppose my father, when we were growing up over there, he instilled that in us from a very young age. And so momentarily I forgot that warrior woman, because I was so overwhelmed. But then it's kicked in and I was like, well, I don't want this to control my life. But then the other thing, parallel to me slowly getting to that recognition, I think I wrote about it in the book, was talking to a male colleague one day and I sort of just blurted out, this menopause symptoms is kicking my butt or something like that, I said. And then he had come in to deliver a report or something, and then he just stopped and he told me the story about his friend's mother who had committed suicide. And she was going through menopause. And this was a woman who was a very gentle, soft-natured person. And he was saying how the friend would talk to him about how his mother suddenly became the screaming hellcat. And the friend didn't know how to cope. Anyway, the mother eventually couldn't cope, committed suicide. The family found her diary she had also written, and found what she was feeling. And, obviously that family, even to this day, are still recovering from this. But he shared the story. And as he was sharing the story, the little flash bulbs started to go off in my own head. I was like, man, this guy is telling me my story. This is exactly how I'm feeling. I'm just hiding it really well. Or at home, I'm certainly not hiding it, but in the workplace, I'm hiding it. And I was like, how long can I actually go on and do this? Like somewhere inside was the thought that you can't do this forever. Something's got to give. You're going to break.
It's going to give.
And so I went on the journey. So I continued to write, and then I started looking for a GP. I'm like, okay, I need to figure out the symptoms first. That's the first thing I need to figure out. And eventually found a holistic GP, on one of the health websites that was my favorite health food store, and was just Googling around for some products. And then this guy's name popped up. And so I started working with him, and he was a somatic healing doctor. So he had lived and worked with shamans across the world. He was also a Western GP. And so he was using all these different modalities in the way he treated his patients. And so when I came to see him, he, the first thing he did was he said, let's run some tests. Let's see where you are in terms of the blood tests, what stage of menopause. I was obviously in perimenopause. And then I also have diabetes. So he was looking at that, the sugars. He's like, we need to make sure those are under control. But aside from that, he started to give me some coping mechanisms like deep breathing, meditation. He introduced me to Kundalini breathing, which is breathing up through the vaginal part and then up the spine. Now, I struggled with that at first. I ended up going to find a YouTube video. There's a woman in the UK who's really good at that. And I followed her direction,
Yeah.
And then he would, when I have sessions with him, we would first start those sessions with that breathing. And what I noticed with the breathing techniques and going into those mindfulness practices was that they started to get me present to my thoughts that I think I'd been denying for a long time. And what I mean by that is I was noticing in my life, I started to notice in my life that there was a thread, there was a pattern where I had always put everyone first. My daughter, my partner, my family members. Even at work, I was always nurturing colleagues and helping them have success in their careers or have success on the projects and so on and so on. And I was, number one, I wasn't on my list. If I was on my list, I was right at the bottom. So that was the first thing that I noticed through the writing, through the work with Dr. Mario. And I was like, this has got to change. I think the physicality and the metaphysical side of a woman also kicks in at that time.
Yes,
and you suddenly start to ask these questions that you potentially may have had a minor inquiry about earlier in life, but suddenly that kicks in really strong. I noticed for me, I was like, I started asking, what about me? That was the dominant thought through that time. I was noticing, what about me? What about me? What about me?
And who am I?
Yeah, and who am I? And what do I really want to do? And all of these things.
Yeah.
And so slowly I began to explore, and it was explored through working with Dr. Mario, because he wasn't only doing the physical work with me, the stuff on the physical body. He started counseling me as well, because he's a, multifaceted type of doctor. And he would ask me these questions like, so what are you going to do? Okay, you're asking these questions about what about me, but what are you going to do about that? What action steps are you going to take towards actually exploring that? And he also suggested I go on a retreat. And I remember, arguing with him about that, because work priorities were driving. Don't have time for that. It was all about, I don't have time for that. But I did find one that was for 3 days. And so I thought, okay, I can at least do 3 days. I can go on the Friday, the Saturday, Sunday. So I'm only missing the Friday from work, and managed to make that work. And then I met the second helper, who was a Chinese medicine practitioner. And it was his retreat that I went on. And he was teaching me how to eat better, how to, do quick meals, but that were healthy meals that were going to give me vitality and energy. He also did all kinds of things like acupuncture, and I had massages and all these things with him while I was there. And there was only 3 of us on the retreat, so it was a very small group, which was great. It was down in Rye. So beach retreat, beautiful. We did qigong and we did yoga every day. And I was just like, wow, I was starting to find myself. And then I think I was I think it was hydrotherapy we were doing one time, and I was in the pool. And he said to me, oh, have you been in touch with your partner and your daughter? And I said, no. I said, I need to detox from them too. It was just something I blurted out, but there was a truth in that statement that I don't think I realized until I actually sat with it. And I realized I needed to detox from lots of people and go inward. And I suppose that's where the sacred journey around menopause began for me, because I started to really explore lots of things around who I was. And it comes out, there's parts of it in the book, the journals, and look, I will say, and I will say something about the journaling. That was not in the first draft of the book. But I took the book to an editor, and she said to me, something's missing from this book. She said, it's a good book. We can release it as it is. You're a good writer. But she said, something is missing from this. And I was like, and I said to her, well, I've got this journal. She said, where does all this information come from? And I said, I've done a lot of research, but a lot of it is what was going on at the time that I journaled. And she said, well, are you open to sharing some of the journal? I'm not going to ask you for all of it, but just a few extracts. And I was like, oh dear, I wasn't ready, because, there's a vulnerability around that.
Yeah, huge, yeah.
And so, but I did send her a few extract, and she said, that's what's missing in the book. So then I started to look at the pieces of the journal, and I suppose whatever chapter I'm covering, the theme of the chapter, those were the extracts of the journals to support that I started to put in the book. And I know that it's a stronger book for that, but there's still sometimes fear around it, because I'm like, wow, Imagine, people reading it, you always think people are going to judge you.
Yes.
It's like, man, they're going to know that Wendy's not as well put together as everyone thinks she is. But the thing is, it's been
to have.
Yeah,
they really are. Yeah.
It's actually been the thing that's helped a lot of women. The women who have read the book, the audio is almost done. We're just about finished, because I read the book, and it's now going to be an audio as well, because a lot of women who work with me said, hey, I don't read a lot, but while I'm cooking, I like to listen to things. So will you do an audio? So yeah, the audio is almost done, and I'll release that probably, I think, early in the new year. But yeah, in the end, it was going on the journey of exploration and really digging into myself and facing some very hard truths that I'd been avoiding for a lot of my life. When you're in automatic pilot, the first part of my automatic pilot was surviving, raising my daughter. My partner that I'm with now only came into my life. He was, we got together when my daughter was almost 11 years old. So I did 10 years on my own, being mother, provider, father, all of these things to my daughter, plus career woman. There was a lot on my plate. And even though those feelings stirred within me, was I really following the path that I really wanted to do? Now, I'm not going to knock corporate, because I had a great time in corporate, but there are parts of corporate that were difficult. There's, bullying occurs in corporate. There's not enough support for women in corporate. It is still quite a male-dominated space. But I will say that quite a few men supported me in my career, right? As I grew in my career, there were a lot of men who forwarded that growth. So not all of the men were against us women, but it was difficult to talk to them, even the supportive ones, about that very trying menopausal journey. I found that very difficult. to talk to them about. Because, you know, even if you just mentioned, like, for example, when the younger women would say, you know, I'm not coming in today, and they'd say, you know, I've got my period and they're going through really bad cramps. If you just mentioned period, the men would like literally, they're like, oh my God, they shift uncomfortably. And, you know, because they just didn't want to have the conversations around women's health. It makes them incredibly awkward. I hope that that changes. I actually believe that we women are going to have to champion the cause in the workplace. And some of the women that I work with now, aside from helping them change careers or identify what they need to identify to move into the career they love, I do also have the conversations with them about advocating in the workplace for women's support. You know, like, you need to be the one sharing the stories, because if we don't, then no one understands.
No one does. Yeah.
And you don't make any inroads.
Which I think is why those excerpts from your journal are so powerful and important in your book. I was thinking when you were saying about that, and then talking about the women, you know, having to go in and advocate, it made me think of, and I won't be able to attribute this quote to anyone specific, even though I know it is somebody's, but this idea of, like, we don't heal in silence, we have to heal out loud. And we don't heal in isolation. We have to heal kind of in a collective. And I think of that when I look at your excerpts, it's like part of the healing I imagine too, that it kind of exposing those is quite healing as much as it is vulnerable, because so much of the process of moving through something or healing from something is allowing it to be seen, allowing ourselves to be seen. And it sounds like the corporate arena was a really hard place for that to happen.
That's right.
You couldn't have those conversations, right?
No, I couldn't have the conversations. And in the end, it was also the fact that I wasn't getting the support. Now, I need to be upfront and say I wasn't always asking for the support, because I wasn't having the conversation. So, you know, a lot of the men around me didn't know. They could see, like, when I had the hot flash and I dashed out and blouse was wet, they knew something was going on. But here's the other thing. Because everything has become about being so politically correct, so many of them who may have been curious didn't feel like they could ask me the question, what's going on with you, Wendy, or start alluding to the changes in my body, or because that, you know, they didn't want to end up in an HR department because they crossed lines.
Yeah.
And so there's so many conversations and steps that need to happen to make it safe for women to speak about it, but also for men to actually approach a woman and say, what help do you need? Because I've also seen women go off in corporate and accuse men and say certain things about them and say, you know, how dare you ask me that question? Well, then how do we actually move forward? We do have to create safe spaces for the conversation for both parties, because otherwise, how do you actually have the conversation? You know? So I see that as a downfall on both sides, right? I have seen women, when men have braved it and have asked me, there have been one or two when I was still in corporate, I was open to it. I said, look, you don't want to know. I would say to them, you don't want to know about this menopause thing. I said, this is what it does to me. You know, you see me run out of the meeting rooms. I've run out of the meeting rooms because I'm afraid I'm going to throw up all over the table. Or, you know, the hot flash is so bad that, you know, I literally feel like my head's going to come off my head because I'm so hot. I need to get to the bathroom to cool down, all of these things. I said, and then I'm embarrassed because my blouse is sticking to me. You know, you start dressing in layers, all of these type of things. But even, you know, when you get down to the lowest layer, which is your blouse and your bra, well, nothing left to take off, right? So,
you need multiple blouses in the
that's
in your
right.
workspace. Yeah.
Yes.
But for many of those men, they would have women in their lives as well. So, you know, it's not only relating it to your experience with female co-workers, but it's also at home. It's got to help at home as well, because those conversations and appreciation and understanding and awareness and all of that has to go on at home as well. So they benefit in both arenas, you know, at work and at home, surely.
Yeah, they do. But I think also for some men, because I know certainly when my partner tried to approach the subject with me, I'd bite his head off, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
this is
yeah.
during the pheromometer stage of my menopause. That
Yes.
thing is swinging on
High
red the
stress.
whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because
Yeah.
because when you don't understand what's going on with you in the early stages, it is difficult to articulate that to a man.
Mm, mm.
Um, and so there, I think the education is like a piece by piece stage. You can't just overwhelm anybody. I mean, even my daughter would say to me, "What is going on with you?"
Mm,
You know,
mm.
and and then she would say, I think one time she said to me, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be as bad as it is with you. And I said, and I looked at her and I said, well, you don't know because you 20 something, you're young. You at the stage of life where this isn't coming for you for another 20 years or so. So you don't actually understand what it does. But then I realized also dismissing her like that without actually educating her was not
Yeah.
the wisest thing to do either. And so in the end, it is about conversations, awkward conversations with people at all levels, with all genders, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
And there's
making
been
it
a lot
safe.
of, yeah, yeah, absolutely making it safe. And I think there has definitely been shifts forward, positive shifts forward in the workplace reform and support and everything around this. Because recently there was a government inquiry into menopause, and there were 25 recommendations that came out of that inquiry at government level. So they will start to sift through, well, if they're taken up, that's the next challenge. So they've been
Yes.
recommended, but hello, now whoever is in power at the time needs to pick those up and make them, enact them. But they are at multiple levels, like you've been talking about. So there's an awareness campaign that needs to go on, education, awareness. But then there's the systems that need to be put in place as well within the workforce, so within those HR departments or whatever departments they might be. Now that's in the corporate,
Yes.
system, if you like. There are other multiple systems as well that people are employed in. But if we stick with corporate, that's, so it is being addressed. And I guess if you are that corporate or a corporate, do you want to become that employer of choice because you are, accommodating women who feel this way with more flexible, conditions or whatever the programs might be? I'm wondering, Wendy, with the women that you help from a career point of view, what kind of information are you getting back from them? Are many of them having these conversations? Or I know this is a bit of a left field question for you. How do you approach
Look,
this?
some of them are, but many of them are still. And yes, I do believe the conversation is being elevated more and more. But things do move at a snail's pace. We know that if we even look at the history of women's rights, right? It was a very
Yeah.
slow pace. And we're the ones that need to consistently advocate for our health. But I don't think it's hard for corporate to do the accommodation of midlife women. And the reason is because they do it with women coming off maternity leave. There are programs already in place to support women. So especially a lot of corporates now have that hybrid working environment where, a woman can work partly from home. She can start later. So if she needs to drop the kids off to school, she can finish earlier. She can do some hours at home, whatever. There's hybrid environments. And I believe that the same kind of strategy can apply to midlife women. But the thing is, we're the ones that's not really bringing it to our employers' attention. Now, it's slowly getting there. I think there's work to be done to uplift that conversation more. But the practices are already in place. Because when women go on maternity leave, I know that some women, when I was going on maternity leave, I worked from home for the last 3 months of my pregnancy. You know, you need to be willing to ask. I asked. I was going through trauma, all of these things, because my relationship had ended. I was pregnant when my relationship with my daughter's father ended. So there was a lot of trauma there. And I just went to the boss and spoke to him about it. I was just there again, vulnerability, authenticity. I said, this is what's happened in my life. And he said, well, we need to make sure that you're healthy. So how about you work from home? And so you can rest when you need to rest. You can go and see your doctors when you. He was amazing, right? And that was 27, 28 years ago when it wasn't a thing. Now the whole hybrid working environment is actually very much a thing. And so sometimes women need to be courageous enough to ask. We need to ask for the support that we need. And then come with the solutions as well. So, some of the women that I work with now, they say, oh, but where do I start? I said, go and talk to HR about the programs that are already in place to support women going on maternity leave, women coming back from maternity leave, and how they transition slowly back into the workforce. I said, because all of those can be adapted to support the midlife woman. They already have it in place. They just need to adapt it and adjust it. And then they go, oh, wow, I never even thought about that. Well, I certainly also didn't think about that when I was going through it. This was something that came later as I explored more and more, but by that stage, when I started thinking about it, I had already left corporate. So menopause was the catalyst that got me out of corporate.
That was going to be my next question, was when you did all that exploration, which takes time, right? You have to carve out that time. So I was wondering whether you'd made the decision to leave corporate, which then, might have helped to create a little bit of extra space for you to do that. Because that is a challenge too, isn't it? Is how do I do all of that while I'm doing all of this at the same time? And what did you find, Erica? Like 13% of women or something leave the workforce at this time.
That was the stat in a news article that I was reading. And I know when I mentioned that to Wendy, she was like, I think that's probably low. That's probably a low estimation. But it strikes me, 13% sounds high to me. It sounds like a big number of people. And it made me think too, I'm going to bring the 2 points together, but you talking about, people don't think to ask for these accommodations. I think maybe sometimes leaving probably feels like the easier option if you are feeling like you are going crazy. Like if you think it's a you problem, if you think it's the product of you having, an individual issue, if we haven't been having these open and honest conversations about the impact that the menopause transition has on women collectively, then you might not realize that what you're experiencing is within a norm of what people experience and that you can be supported. So then we have this big group of women who are leaving the workforce thinking that it was a fault of theirs, that they just couldn't cope. It makes me sad to think that that's how that unfolds potentially. You obviously did choose to leave though, Wendy. What was the thinking there?
Well, for me, it was a perfect storm of the exploration of the impact of menopause on me, feeling dissatisfied with corporate at that stage. I'd run that many projects, I'd managed that many teams. And I was looking at it and I'm going, well, this is not life and death stuff. This is kind of boring. Okay. Like I became very good at my job, but I could do it in my sleep. The only part of the work that I enjoyed at that stage of my life was helping people grow. The actual delivery of the projects, the software projects, the multi-million-dollar projects, all of that, it was boring to me, so that was one thing. I loved managing the people, and it's probably one of the key reasons I stayed longer than I probably should have, because I did enjoy working with people and watching them grow. It was also the thing that informed me. So one of the things I did do, I think I was 18 months into menopause, I started to, because I'm someone that always likes to evaluate. So self-analysis is really important to me. And it was similar to when I was going through that time when the relationship broke up and I knew I needed to make more money. So I was like, what do I do? And who do I go talk to? And so for me, it was like, okay, what do you really want to do? I started asking those questions in my journal. Like, what is it that you really want to do? And then I was like, yeah, but what am I good at? And so I actually created a little process, which I now have on my website, and it's called Mining Your Story. And I mined my own story. And I went and go, what's the thread? What's the patterns? Where have you had a lot of joy? Where has certain work and things come really naturally to you and you could You enjoy doing it. You can do it in your sleep. You know it's contributed something to others. I started asking those questions, and I dug. And I dug at all the things, both on the personal and professional level, of where I had overcome. So there's lots of things in my personal life that I've overcome: South Africa, the relationship, being held up at gunpoint in my very first job, all of these things overcome, right? In my professional life, I was one of the first women on key projects. So I was working in a very man-dominated environment, but I managed to succeed and grow. So I was like, there are so many areas. So I would, okay, what were the strategies? What did I actually do to overcome? So by the time I finished mining my story, I had this list of all these wins in my life, stuff that I'd never even considered were wins, were achievements, were valuable. And I was like, man, I can sell this. I can do something with this.
Yeah.
And I started to frame up my life in terms of even my LinkedIn profile, and I was like, where was I happiest? I was happiest when I was helping people. Where else was I happiest? When I'm writing. And I decided to combine the two. And that's how, and I already had the business. It was very part-time, as I said. I was sort of helping people along the way. And I was like, I can turn this into a business. And that's what I did. I turned it into a business. I went full-time in that business. And that's where I'm working today. I had something, but I did go through a process. And what I've seen with a lot of people that I work with, men and women, I mostly work with women, but men as well that I've worked with, they don't do the foundational piece. They avoid that foundational piece. And the foundational piece is about identifying, first of all, the threads, what makes you happy, the transferable skills, because we all have them. Every single person on this planet has got a bunch of transferable skills that can go into any industry. They just don't know how to frame it and sell it. So that's the next step. And then the wins and achievements. And wins and achievements are not only about where you succeeded on a project or something. It's about what it is. Sometimes it's just about overcoming. What have you overcome? That is a win. That's an achievement. Can we frame it? And I started to frame my work that way. And that's how I started to draw the clients, the people. It's how it's how I work with everyone else now. It's like, we got to figure out you, what you love, what your transferable skills are, where are your wins and achievements and your overcoming, because within those stories are the gold nuggets for your saleable commodities to someone else. And that is fine. That is how I direct all of my work. And, I'm happy to say I have a very high hit rate with success when it comes to people transitioning, but it's because I make my people go through that foundational piece that many of them want to avoid.
Yeah, because it's that inner work, it's that inner reflection, it's
correct,
and really dedicating the time to it. Yeah, I think as a society, we are often looking out to the outside for the solutions, when the solutions, they're always within us. It's just
they're always within. And when you understand that of you, when you begin to understand that inner strength or those inner talents or those inner skills, what people realize is it becomes very easy to write your resume and your LinkedIn profiles, because that, yourself, you're able to communicate, and it becomes very easy to communicate that in an interview. If you don't take the time to know here, you're always going to flounder when people ask you specific questions. You're not going to have the examples to support the answer. And that's where a lot of people fail in job interviews.
Yeah. Right.
You need to know yourself. You need to own yourself. You need to be proud of yourself.
Yeah. And as women, as you rightly pointed out earlier, so many of us feel that way because we're used to putting our needs so far down the list that it's hard to step up and go, well, I'm proud of who I am and what I've done. And, I'm looking forward to where I'm heading. I've got some clarity around where I want to go and what's meaningful for me. So you saying, just delivering those, put as many zeros as you want on it, but really the zeros, delivering the software projects weren't really what was yanking my chain. It was all this other stuff. And that's part of the unraveling of this menopause transition as well within us. there's shifts within us that take place, very much drive that too. I think it's quite, it's very it's synchronicity. I think
Yes.
that it all
Yeah.
kind of comes at that stage of life. I really do believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I
That's
feel like it's for me personally, I feel like it's the most sacred journey I've been on, because it's at the right time as well. I think when we're younger as women, we too entrenched in trying to be the mothers, the partners, all of these things. We're not really ready for that deep questioning, I don't feel. And when I look back, and I think I've certainly shared it in the book, I wasn't ready for the questioning, that deep questioning. But suddenly, when you get to this midlife stage, and I think you also know your years of childbearing are over. You're not going to bring forth physical life anymore. So you need to bring forth spiritual life, I feel. And
1000%.
that's because we always need to, whenever there's a vacuum created, we've got to fill that vacuum with something else. And I think when a woman gets to midlife, that spiritual vacuum is now, you're ready for it. And so you go a little, I found I went a lot deeper. I asked more profound questions. And then, ended up journaling and writing the book. And I'm no longer afraid of whatever's in the book. When I first released it, I was terrified because I'm like, ugh. But now I'm like, you know what? I can own those parts of me too. I can own all the crazy. I can own the feralometer. It was wounding and it was humorous. And I think that's the way to approach life, is to find the humor in it, to understand that, my grandmother, when she was alive, she always used to say, this too shall pass.
Yes,
And
that's what my dad says. Yeah, that's
everything
right.
passes. And so you've got to grab the lessons from it. You've got to grab whatever there is to learn from it, and understand that this too shall pass. I'm through the worst of menopause. I'm post-menopause now. And I love this stage of life. I didn't think I would when I was starting on it, 7 years or whatever many years ago. I was like, oh, this sucks. This is hard. But I'm glad I went through it. I gained a lot, and I gained myself, and I gained my work. I gained my purpose and my meaning. And I pretty much do it on my terms now. I'm working the way I always wanted to work.
I love that. Yeah.
I'm very struck by, I had something written down on my paper that I'd written down before we started, which was a question: too late to start something else? And I think what I'm being left with in this, in that sort of last little part of what you said there, was the beauty of seeing it as another phase rather than a decline, because I mean, you don't have to look very far to see the jokes of like, once you're 40, you're over the hill, right?
Yeah.
And there is this sense that it's like, it's all downhill from here. And yet every single midlife woman that we have spoken to on this podcast has said that they are in the best phase of their life. And that really strikes me because, I know that I've done a lot of questioning in just the last year or so. And to think that, when I eventually do go through the menopausal transition and I hit my 50s and beyond, that there's just still so much to be learned and had, and that it's not too late to start something else. It's not too late to choose something new. So I love that that's sort of where we landed there. So thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the best years are ahead of us.
Yeah.
Especially when
we
we're
still
living longer, right? We're going to live
That's right.
to our 90s. So, when you're in your 50s, girl,
That's
you're
only
ready.
halfway through. That's only halfway through the journey for most of us, and there's wisdom there. Like I look back on my 20s and 30s, and I go, "Oh God, what were you thinking? You were so unwise." Because they just,
But you
and
were
then
fun.
you get. That's right, and then you get to 40, 50, and you go, wow, and you. Like I went out the other night too, because there was an R&B dance event going on, and I love my R&B music, and I just went out to dance, and I was like, I am so happy right now, because I am not 20 or 30 hoping some guy's going to notice me or whatever. My partner's asleep snoring in bed, but I'm out here and I am dancing my socks off.
Love that.
love that.
I think that sums it up. That
I
sums
love
it
that.
up. Oh, thank you so much, Wendy.
So good.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I want to spruik the book one more time. Internal Uprising, Wendy Alexander. Where do people find it, Wendy?
So it's on Amazon. If you put the search in Internal Uprising and my name, it'll come up. And it's on Kindle and paperback. So, yeah, that's where it is.
And for that career advice as well, like that guidance, that mining, girl, you've got me. I'll be one of your clients for sure after this.
Happycareerhub.com is my website. And that Mining Your Story resource is actually on the website. It's a free resource. And then I do a lot of free advice videos, posts and things on LinkedIn. And my handle there is Wendy A. Alexander. I couldn't get Wendy Alexander, so I had to put my little middle initial to get the handle. Wendy A. Alexander is where you'll find me and my work.
Awesome.
Perfect. We'll put all that in the show notes as well, so it's nice and easy.
Blessings.
Love your
Thanks
work,
so
Wendy.
much, Wendy.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
later.
Bye, ladies. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.